Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. We're so glad to have you here today. Have you ever wondered about the legendary women who shaped Japan's history? We often hear about the samurai, the great emperors, and the warriors who fought on the battlefield. But there are incredible women whose stories remain hidden in the shadows of time. Today, we're going to uncover the life of one of these fascinating figures, a woman from feudal Japan who defied expectations, navigated a world dominated by men, and played a pivotal role in shaping the history we know today. Her journey is one of resilience, strength, and extraordinary influence. You might think you know the history of feudal Japan, but trust me, this story will surprise you. It will challenge your perspective on power, leadership, and the role of women in shaping the course of history. But before we dive into her incredible story, I want to remind you to like, share, and subscribe. If you're as excited as I am to uncover these untold stories and discover the hidden legacies of powerful women from the past, make sure to hit that bell icon as well. By doing that, you'll never miss out on any of our future videos that bring history to life in the most unexpected ways. To understand the impact of this remarkable woman, we first need to step back into the world of feudal Japan. This was a time when power was predominantly held by men, and women were often relegated to the background of history. Yet amid this patriarchal society, there were a few exceptional women who rose to prominence, breaking barriers and leaving their mark on the nation. One such figure is Empress Jingu, a legendary ruler who led Japan in the 3rd century, or Lady Nijo, a renowned figure from the Kamakura period whose life was intertwined with both the imperial court and the powerful samurai class. Both women lived in very different times, yet their stories share a common thread. They defied the conventions of their eras and became influential figures in Japan's history. Empress Jingu, for example, is often remembered for leading an army in battle after the death of her husband, something nearly unheard of for a woman at the time. Her leadership and military strategies became legendary, and her legacy continues to be celebrated in Japanese culture to this day. On the other hand, Lady Nijo, though born into a noble family, navigated the political intrigue of the imperial court, becoming the consort of an emperor, and later penning her memoirs, which provide us with an intimate glimpse into the inner workings of the court during her time. These women were not only powerful figures in their own right, but also symbols of the resilience and determination of women throughout Japan's history. Their lives remind us that history is not just written by those who wield swords and sit on thrones, but also by those who against all odds carve out their own destinies and influence the course of a nation. Today, we'll delve into the life of one of these extraordinary women, examining her struggles, triumphs, and the profound impact she had on the world around her. From her rise to power to the legacy she left behind, her story is one that continues to inspire even in modern times. In feudal Japan, the social structure was deeply influenced by the principles of Confucianism and the warrior code known as Bushido, which emphasized loyalty, honor, and discipline. This was a time of constant political and military upheaval, with powerful samurai clans battling for control over land and influence. The era spanned from the 12th century to the 19th century, beginning with the rise of the Kamakura shogunate and ending with the Meiji Restoration. During this period, Japan was governed by a feudal system where land was granted in exchange for military service. The shogunate, the military government, held the ultimate power, while the emperor, though still revered, had little political authority. Below the shogun were the samurai, the warrior class, who played a crucial role in maintaining order, protecting the lands, and serving the lords who ruled over them. The samurai adhered to the strict codes of Bushido, which stressed bravery, loyalty to one's master, and a sense of duty above all else. In such a militarized society, the role of women was often confined to traditional domestic responsibilities. Women in feudal Japan were expected to maintain the household, bear children, and support their husbands in their roles as warriors. However, this view of women was not universal, and while they had limited autonomy, some women rose to positions of power and influence, defying the expectations placed on them. In the samurai culture, women had a unique, though often restrictive, position. While they were not typically warriors themselves, they were trained in the arts of managing the household, raising children, and in some cases, ensuring the survival of the samurai way of life. Women from samurai families were also expected to embody the virtues of loyalty, honor, and strength, and they had a strong influence on the family's reputation and legacy. Some women played critical roles in defending their homes and families in times of war, especially when their husbands were away at battle. Yet, despite their importance within their households, the patriarchal nature of Japanese society severely limited the freedoms and rights of women. Marriage was often arranged to secure alliances or maintain political power, and a woman's worth was often judged by her ability to produce heirs, particularly male heirs, to continue the family line. Women had little say in their marriage arrangements and were expected to submit to the will of their fathers, husbands, or sons. This deeply ingrained patriarchy meant that women were often excluded from holding formal political power, and their stories were typically overshadowed by the achievements of men. Still, in this patriarchal system, there were exceptional women who defied these constraints and rose to power. Whether through royal bloodlines, marriage to influential men, or personal resilience and determination, these women managed to shape the course of history, leaving behind legacies that continue to inspire today. They were both symbols of the rigid societal roles placed on women and examples of how the strength, intelligence, and ambition of a woman could transcend those boundaries, leaving an indelible mark on Japan's history. This particular figure, like many women who rose to prominence in feudal Japan, broke through the rigid societal norms of her time in remarkable ways. In an era where women were often confined to the domestic sphere and their actions were largely dictated by the patriarchal structures of society, she defied expectations and achieved legendary status. One of the primary ways she broke societal norms was through her political influence and leadership. While most women of the time had little to no direct power, this figure rose to a position where she could influence key decisions, often at the highest levels of governance. She was not simply a passive observer of the political world, but an active participant, shaping events and even leading campaigns when necessary. This was an extraordinary feat in an era where the world of politics and war was dominated by men. Her military achievements also set her apart from the women of her time. In a society that viewed warfare as the domain of men, where samurai warriors fought in battles and defended their lands with great honor, this figure demonstrated strength and bravery in the face of adversity, whether through commanding troops, engaging in battle herself, or acting as a key strategist. She broke the mold of what was traditionally expected from women. Her actions on the battlefield were unprecedented for a woman in feudal Japan, and this not only earned her respect from her male counterparts, but solidified her place as a figure of power in her own right. Moreover, she often challenged the expectations placed on women in terms of marriage and family. In feudal Japan, women were often married off for political alliances or to secure family legacy, and their roles were largely defined by their relationships to their husbands or fathers. However, this woman managed to shape her own destiny. Rather than being limited by her gender, she used her intelligence, political acumen, and sheer willpower to forge her own path, often challenging the patriarchal structure that tried to confine her. Her legacy was not merely that of a wife or a mother. She became a symbol of female agency and power. While many women's stories were overshadowed by the achievements of men, this figure's legacy was one of breaking boundaries, serving as a role model for future generations and leaving a lasting imprint on Japan's political and cultural history. She became a legend not just for what she achieved, but for how she challenged the gender norms of her time and showed that women too could wield great influence, power, and authority in a male-dominated world. In breaking these norms, she did not only redefine her own role, but also opened the door for future women to step out of the shadows of history and create their own legacies. Her story proves that even in the most rigid, patriarchal societies, women have the power to shape the course of history in ways that echo through the ages. Her story is one of resilience, courage, and determination in the face of overwhelming odds. In an era where women were expected to be silent, submissive, and confined to the domestic realm, she stepped out and shattered every limitation. With each decision, each action, she rewrote the rules of what was possible for a woman. From navigating the complex political landscape to rising as a powerful leader, her journey was anything but conventional. In a world where honor and loyalty were prized above all else, this extraordinary woman used her intelligent strength and strategic mind to carve a path that few could have imagined. She didn't just break barriers, she redefined them. Her influence extended beyond the confines of her gender, and her legacy would go on to inspire generations to come. As we dive deeper into her life, we'll explore how she navigated the complexities of a male-dominated society, how she became a symbol of defiance and strength, and how her actions left an indelible mark on history. This is a story of a woman who wasn't bound by the norms of her time, but instead became a living legend whose impact still resonates today. Stay with us as we uncover the incredible tale of this woman whose courage, vision, and legacy continue to challenge the narrative of what it means to be a woman in history. Chapter 1: Early Life. She was born into a world that seemed to hold little promise for a woman, especially one who would dare to dream beyond the confines of her expected role. Her family, though of noble descent, was not one of vast power or wealth. Yet it was in this very environment that her early years would be shaped, and the seeds of her future greatness were sown. Growing up, she was often reminded of her place in society. "You are a woman," her father would say. "Your role is to support the family, to marry well, and to bear children." These words, though spoken with love, carried the weight of tradition, the expectation that she would conform to the norms of a patriarchal society. But she was different. She had a sharp mind, a curiosity that couldn't be suppressed, and a fierce determination that burned in her heart. Her mother, though kind and nurturing, also knew the limits placed on women. "The world may not give you many opportunities," she would often whisper as she taught her daughter how to manage the household. "But that doesn't mean you can't make a difference in your own way." This wisdom, though humble, would shape her worldview, one where she understood the power of subtlety and strategy, of being resourceful within the confines of expectation. But it wasn't just her parents who shaped her early life. She was deeply influenced by the stories of powerful women she heard from the elders in her family. Her grandmother, who had lived through the upheaval of civil wars, would often speak of the fierce women who had fought for their families, the women who had stood beside the men wielding their power, not with swords, but with influence. Never underestimate the quiet strength of a woman. Her grandmother would say, "Sometimes the most powerful weapon is the one you don't see." These lessons began to take root. She was no longer simply a passive participant in the world around her. Her mind was sharpened by these early teachings, and she began to question the expectations of her gender. "Why can't I be more than just a wife?" she would wonder to herself. "Why can't I achieve more, accomplish something greater than anyone could have imagined?" The turning point in her early life came when she was just a young woman still learning the ways of courtly life. She had caught the eye of an important figure in her society, and the prospect of marriage was already being discussed. It was here that she began to see the limits of the world she had been born into. She was to marry for status, to secure alliances, and to continue the legacy of her family. But deep down, she knew that such a life, while comfortable, would not satisfy the fire burning inside her. One evening, as her family gathered for a formal dinner, her father turned to her with an almost apologetic smile. "It is time, my daughter," he said. "You are of age, and it is our duty to ensure you are well matched." But instead of feeling honored, she felt a quiet rage building within her. "Is this my fate?" she thought. "To be a pawn in a game I don't even understand." In that moment, a quiet resolve began to take hold. She would not be defined by the circumstances of her birth. She would carve out her own path, even if it meant defying tradition. She knew it would be difficult, perhaps even dangerous, but she was determined to change the narrative of her life. As she grew older, she began to take small but significant steps toward independence. She secretly studied political strategy and military tactics, learning the art of negotiation and power dynamic skills that were considered unnecessary, even improper, for a woman of her station. But she saw them as tools that would help her shape her own destiny, tools that would give her the power she needed to forge a future where she was in control. She began to challenge the expectations that had been set for her. One day, when asked to serve as a hostess at an important gathering of men, she boldly took the opportunity to speak her mind on a matter of strategy. The men at the table, taken aback by her insights, began to listen. The seed of her potential was planted, and she soon realized that her voice, her ideas had power, a power that could not be ignored. Her early years were marked by quiet rebellion against the norms of her time. While others expected her to be docile and obedient, she was cultivating the tools that would one day allow her to lead, to rise above the roles that society had assigned her. And it was these formative experiences, these quiet moments of resistance, that would set the stage for the extraordinary life that lay ahead. In feudal Japan, the social expectations of women were firmly rooted in a patriarchal system that dictated nearly every aspect of their lives. Women were generally seen as subservient to men, their roles defined largely by their relationships to their fathers, husbands, and sons. The primary duties of women were domestic in nature, focusing on managing the household, bearing children, and supporting their male counterparts. These expectations were deeply influenced by Confucian principles, which emphasized the importance of hierarchy, filial piety, and order within the family and society. From a young age, girls were taught to accept their place in this rigid social structure. Education for women was typically centered around domestic skills, cooking, sewing, cleaning, and raising children, preparing them to run a household efficiently. Few girls had access to formal education or training in fields like politics, philosophy, or military strategy. Instead, their value was measured by their ability to uphold the ideals of modesty, obedience, and loyalty. They were expected to embody virtues like quiet strength and patience, and their primary goal in life was to secure a good marriage and bear sons who could carry on the family name. Marriage in particular was viewed as the most important event in a woman's life. It was often arranged by her family primarily for political or social alliances rather than love. A woman's worth was often judged by her ability to bear children, especially male heirs. Once married, she became the property of her husband and was expected to be loyal, dutiful, and obedient to him. Her role was to support her husband's ambitions, manage the household, and ensure the well-being of his children. In addition to their domestic responsibilities, women in the samurai class especially were expected to manage the family's honor and reputation. While they were not warriors themselves, samurai women had to be strong in the face of war. They were trained in how to defend their homes, and some even participated in battle when necessary, though this was rare and often seen as an exception to the rule. Their courage and resilience were important, but still, their place in the world was defined by the men they were associated with. Fathers, husbands, or sons. However, the restrictions on women went beyond marriage and family life. The social expectations were such that women were generally excluded from holding political or military power. Despite some notable exceptions such as Empress Jingu and Lady Nijo, the overarching expectation was that women would not seek power or fame for themselves. Politics, war, and leadership were considered the domain of men and women who sought influence outside of their prescribed roles, often faced harsh criticism and social ostracism. While the social order was clearly defined, there were occasional opportunities for women to step outside the boundaries of tradition. Some women from noble families wielded significant power as regents or advisors, though this was often through marriage or familial connections rather than direct political ambition. Others, like Miko shrine maidens, had some degree of religious or spiritual authority. But again, this was a role rooted in cultural traditions rather than political power. In essence, feudal Japan's social expectations of women were designed to maintain stability and order within a strictly hierarchical system. Women were valued primarily for their roles in the family and society, and their personal ambitions, especially in the realms of politics and warfare, were seen as a threat to that order. Women were expected to be silent, supportive, and dedicated to their families, with little room for deviation from this path. It was a world where a woman's greatest achievements were often measured by her ability to fit within these narrow, predefined roles. However, those few women who dared to challenge these boundaries became legends, proving that even in a society defined by rigid gender roles, remarkable women could still rise to great heights. Chapter 2: Marriage and Political Influence. As she grew older, the pressure to marry became more pronounced. In a society where marriage was not merely a personal choice, but a strategic tool for securing power, her family began discussing potential suitors. At first, she resisted. Why must my future be decided by others? She often wondered as the talks of alliances and family interests filled the air around her. But she knew deep down that marriage was inevitable, especially for someone of her status. Still, she held on to the hope that somehow she could wield her marriage as a stepping stone, not just a submission to fate. Her parents, though loving and protective, adhered to the norms of the time. A good marriage is the foundation of everything, my dear, her father would say, his voice heavy with the weight of tradition. You will bring honor to our family through this union. It was a sentiment shared by many, as marriages among the elite were seen as the most effective way to consolidate power, form alliances, and secure the family's future. The chosen suitor was a powerful and influential figure. His family held significant sway in the political landscape, and through marriage, her family would gain much needed influence. This is an opportunity, a chance to rise, her mother whispered, attempting to reassure her, though the words lacked the warmth she needed. You must think of the future, of the good this will bring to us all. On the day of her marriage, she stood at the altar, a silent figure in the grand hall, her heart heavy with mixed emotions. She understood the importance of the union, but resented the fact that her personal desires had been set aside. I am not just a piece in their game, she thought, her mind racing. I will make this my own. I will play my part, but on my terms. As the years passed, her role in the court began to evolve. She quickly realized that her marriage, while a tool to solidify her family's position, also offered her access to the halls of power. Her husband, though influential, was not a man of great political insight. While he fought on battlefields, she remained at court learning the intricacies of politics and diplomacy. Your silence is your power, one of the elder women in the court advised her during a quiet evening of tea. Speak only when your words can shape the future. With every passing day, she learned the language of power, how to observe, how to listen, and most importantly, how to align herself with the right allies. The men around me may have their swords, but I have my mind, she thought, as she watched the strategies unfold at court. Her intelligence, once dismissed as a mere trait of a well-educated woman, began to reveal itself as her most formidable weapon. Her ability to navigate the political landscape was soon noticed by others, including the ruling elite. The court, though patriarchal, was not immune to the influence of women who played their cards carefully. She knew that her words and actions, while often overlooked by the men around her, could shape outcomes in subtle yet powerful ways. She began advising her husband, suggesting strategies, offering insights into the political dynamics of rival factions, and quietly positioning herself as a trusted advisor. "You are the voice of reason when all else fails," her husband would remark, after she'd subtly guided him toward a better decision. He didn't realize it, but she had already taken the reins in many matters of importance. Her influence continued to grow as she made alliances with key figures in the court. "What you do next will define your future," one of her allies cautioned her, a wise and seasoned diplomat. "Your position here is not just a matter of your family's status. It's about the role you are willing to play in shaping the direction of our land." As her power in the court increased, so did the risks. She knew that in a society where women were seen as subordinate, her actions were often scrutinized. "You must tread carefully," one of her mentors advised. "For every step you take can either secure your position or bring your downfall." But despite the dangers, she moved with a quiet confidence, understanding that her political savvy and subtle influence were her greatest tools. Through her marriage, she had secured not just an alliance for her family, but a foothold in a world that would otherwise have excluded her. As her role evolved, she began to shape not just her own future, but that of her family and the nation at large. Her courtly presence became one of quiet power, her intelligence guiding decisions from behind the scenes, and her political alliances paving the way for a future where she could not only survive, but thrive. In a world where the expectations of women were clear: marry well, bear children, and support your husband, she found herself constantly navigating the complex and often stifling boundaries of a patriarchal system. Every day, she faced the challenge of being seen, but not heard, acknowledged for her beauty and grace, but rarely for her intellect or ambition. Yet she was determined to find a way to carve out her own space, to defy the limitations placed on her by society. One afternoon, as she sat in the gardens of her husband's estate, her closest confidant, an older woman who had been with her family for years, turned to her and whispered, "You must remember, my lady, that in this world a woman's strength lies not in what she says, but in how she moves within the shadows. You must play the game, but never let them see your hand. These words resonated deeply with her. She understood that to survive, let alone thrive, she could not afford to openly challenge the system. Instead, she would have to be strategic, maneuvering with subtlety and grace. At court, she learned to observe first, listen closely, and speak only when necessary. A wise woman never shows her cards, one of the court advisors had once said to her. In this world, the louder you speak, the more you reveal your weakness. So she became a master of reading the room. The men around her, powerful lords, generals, and advisors, would debate fiercely, often ignoring her presence, assuming her to be a mere spectator. But she listened carefully, picking up on the details others missed, understanding the dynamics of power and influence in ways that were invisible to most. Over time, she learned to manipulate these dynamics to her advantage. One evening, after a particularly heated debate between two rival factions at court, she subtly whispered to her husband, who had been caught in the middle, "You must side with Lord Takeda. His influence is growing, and to oppose him now would risk the unity we've worked so hard to maintain." Her husband, though initially dismissive of her suggestion, eventually took her advice. In the following days, he became the key player in an alliance that shifted the balance of power in their favor. He never knew it, but it was her subtle maneuvering that had secured their position. But it wasn't always easy. Her growing influence drew the suspicion of others, particularly the men who had grown accustomed to dismissing her. "You must watch her," one of them had whispered in private. "She is far more clever than she appears." And though she had learned to keep her true intentions hidden behind a mask of politeness and decorum, there were times when the men at court grew wary of her, sensing that she was more than just a supportive wife. One such moment came during a particularly tense political negotiation. Her husband was preparing to make a critical decision that could either solidify their standing or destroy it. As he deliberated with his advisors, she stepped forward, offering a quiet suggestion that, unbeknownst to him, was exactly what needed to be said. The room fell silent, and for a moment all eyes turned toward her. "Perhaps you should consider an alliance with the Takeda clan," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of years of unspoken wisdom. Her husband glanced at her, his face unreadable. "You think that will work?" he asked, his voice laced with doubt. But in that moment, she knew he trusted her. He nodded, making the alliance and securing their future. Yet, with every small victory, came the realization that she could not be open about the power she wielded. In a world where a woman's place was to be seen not heard, and certainly not in positions of authority. She had to remain in the shadows, guiding events from behind the scenes. The irony was not lost on her. She had the power to change the course of history, but she had to do it quietly, invisibly. She could never fully step into the light for fear of being punished or removed from power. "I've learned," she would say to herself in quiet moments, "that power does not always need to be visible. It is the hand that moves the chess pieces from behind the board that wins the game." Her greatest strength lay in her ability to understand the limits of the system she was working within, and to use those limits to her advantage. She didn't need to confront the patriarchal system head on. Instead, she quietly navigated it, using her intelligence, wit, and cunning to shape outcomes from the margins. She made her voice heard without ever raising it, and in doing so, she became a force to be reckoned with, one whose power was undeniable even if it remained hidden from the eyes of those who couldn't see beyond the boundaries of the world they had created. Chapter 3: Rising Power and Influence. As the years passed, her influence began to grow in ways that even she had not anticipated. She had become a force in the court, not by brute strength or overt power, but through her mastery of strategy and diplomacy. Her rise was slow, deliberate, and quiet, a series of calculated moves that laid the foundation for her eventual prominence. In a world where men were the ones who commanded armies and signed decrees, she had learned to wield her power in subtler yet far-reaching ways. One afternoon, as she sat with her husband in the garden, discussing the ongoing tensions between two factions in their court, he looked at her with a curious gaze. "I don't know how you do it," he said, his voice full of both admiration and frustration. "You always seem to know exactly what to say to sway people to our side." She smiled softly, her eyes never leaving the garden path before her. "It's not what I say, my dear," she replied quietly. "It's about understanding what others fear and what they desire most. When you know that you can always find a way to make them listen." Her husband chuckled, but he couldn't deny that her words had a ring of truth. He, like many others, had underestimated her intelligence at first. She had been seen as little more than a dutiful wife, a support to his ambitions, but over time, it became clear that her insights into human nature, her ability to read the room, were invaluable. "Perhaps I should listen to you more often," he said, with a wry smile, though he would rarely admit it in public. Her strategy was always to observe first, to listen closely before speaking. She understood that the men in power often saw only what was directly in front of them, blinded by their egos or their sense of duty. But she, ever the observer, could see beyond the surface. When tensions arose between two rival factions, she would listen to the whispers in the corridors, to the rumors that spread like wildfire in the court. She would spend hours speaking with those who were often ignored servants' advisors, and even the lesser lords who didn't carry the same weight in the political landscape. Through these conversations, she would gather information that others overlooked. "Do you really think he'll back down?" One of her closest allies asked her one evening after a particularly heated argument between two influential lords. She nodded slowly, a thoughtful look on her face. "Not right now, but in time he will. His pride won't allow him to admit defeat immediately, but his fear of losing influence will push him to make concessions." Her ally raised an eyebrow, impressed by her insight. "You are always thinking several steps ahead," he said with admiration. It was through these quiet moments of planning, these behind-the-scenes discussions, that her power grew. She began to forge alliances with those who seemed unimportant in the eyes of the great lords, knowing that their loyalty, once earned, would give her a crucial advantage. She made friends with those who were often dismissed, women at court, lower-ranking officials, and even the samurai who had no direct connection to her husband's clan. Each new connection was a piece of the puzzle she was putting together, a network that would prove invaluable when the time came. Her rise wasn't without its risks. As she gained more influence, there were whispers in the halls, whispers of her growing power, of her ability to sway decisions without ever stepping into the light. One evening, a fellow courtier, a man who had once dismissed her as a mere ornament of the court, approached her cautiously. "You've been very helpful to my lord," he said, his voice low, "but you must be careful. Power like yours can be dangerous. Men may not always appreciate a woman who seeks influence." She met his gaze, her expression unwavering. "I don't seek power for the sake of power," she replied calmly. "I seek what is rightfully mine." Her words, though simple, carried the weight of years of quiet struggle. She had not sought to overthrow the system. She had simply learned how to exist within it, how to navigate the complex web of relationships and allegiances that defined the world she inhabited. She understood that in a society where women were meant to be seen and not heard, her power would have to be subtle. And subtlety, she realized, was her greatest weapon. Soon her influence began to be felt in ways that could no longer be ignored. Her husband, once the dominant figure in their relationship, found himself increasingly relying on her counsel. He began to take her advice on matters of state military strategy and court politics. "You were right," he admitted, after one particularly successful negotiation with a rival clan. "Your way of seeing things, it's always been sharper than mine." She nodded, her expression one of quiet satisfaction. Sometimes it's not about being right. It's about knowing how to turn the tide in your favor. Her position at court continued to strengthen, and with it, so did her power. She had not done it through force or violence. She had done it through strategy, patience, and the careful cultivation of relationships. As her influence grew, she began to envision a future where her voice was not just a whisper in the background, but a force to be reckoned with. She was no longer just a wife or a noble woman. She was a strategist, politician, and most importantly, a woman whose power could no longer be ignored. And as she looked ahead, she knew that the path she had carefully laid out for herself would eventually lead her to a place where she could shape the future of the court of her family and perhaps even of the nation itself. As her power grew, so did her influence in shaping the court's decisions and the broader political landscape. While others spoke in bold proclamations, she spoke in quiet truths, her words weaving into the fabric of policy and governance, often without anyone realizing how much her presence had shaped the outcome. It wasn't long before her reputation as a wise, capable advisor spread throughout the court. One day, after a particularly heated debate between two rival factions over control of a disputed region, she sat beside her husband in the council chamber, observing the arguments unfold. The men at the table were passionate, their voices rising in a familiar dance of power and pride. As the argument grew louder, her husband looked to her, silently asking for her insight. She cleared her throat softly, and the room quieted as they all turned to her. Perhaps she began, her voice calm and measured. "We could consider an alliance with Lord Moriyama. Not by force, but by offering him something that gives him a reason to support our cause rather than oppose it. His clan has long desired influence in that region, but it's not just land that they seek. A promise of trade, an understanding of shared goals, this could secure his loyalty without bloodshed." Her husband raised an eyebrow, and after a pause he nodded. "What she says is true, he agreed, surprising many of the men who had expected a more traditional, forceful response. They eventually brokered a deal with Lord Moriyama, and her strategic thinking prevented a costly war, securing a critical alliance instead. Her reputation as a tactician was solidified that day, and her influence only continued to grow. But her achievements weren't just political. The way she navigated the intricacies of the court also had a profound impact on the cultural fabric of their society. She subtly challenged the traditional roles of women without ever openly rebelling against the expectations placed upon her. In the process, she became a symbol of a woman who, while bound by the confines of a patriarchal society, managed to wield influence in ways that were almost invisible to those around her. Her ability to communicate with people from all walks of life became a cornerstone of her power. She was as comfortable speaking with courtiers and generals as she was with servants or lower-ranking officials. The strength of a leader lies not only in their command of the battlefield. She once told a trusted advisor, but in their ability to win hearts and minds. The loyalty of the people is not won by force, but by understanding their needs, their fears, and their desires. And she did just that. Over the years, she cultivated a network of supporters who respected her not just for her strategic mind, but for her empathy and her ability to see beyond the immediate needs of those in power. "She listens," one of her allies said in admiration. "And that's what makes her different. She understands the game, but she also understands the people who play it." Her influence also extended into the arts. Though she never sought personal fame, she recognized the importance of cultural legacy. She quietly encouraged the development of literature and art that reflected the values of the court, values of loyalty, honor, and the delicate balance of power. Through her subtle patronage, poets, scholars, and artists found opportunities to thrive, and their works began to reflect the complexity of the political and social world around them. "History is written not just by the victors," she once said, "but by those who have the courage to tell the truth through their art." Though she never sought to challenge the traditional gender roles of her time overtly, her mere presence in a world dominated by men was itself a quiet revolution. She didn't need to stand at the front lines with a sword in hand or claim the title of ruler. Instead, she shaped history from behind the scenes, using her intellect, her intuition, and her understanding of human nature to guide her family and her nation through a period of great change. Her impact was felt beyond the walls of the court. Even in the countryside, where life remained simpler and traditions were stronger, the people began to speak of her with a sense of respect. She has a way of seeing what others cannot, a traveling merchant once said. She has the power to change things, but she does it without ever raising her voice. Her name became synonymous with wisdom and strategy, with subtlety and power, an enduring symbol of the strength of women, not just as silent supporters, but as key players in the world of politics and culture. As she continued to rise, her influence expanded, and with it, her legacy began to take shape. She had not only shaped her family's future, but had begun to shape the future of the nation itself. Her achievements were not always publicly acknowledged, but they were no less significant. In the quiet chambers of power, in the whispered discussions of allies and enemies alike, her name was spoken with respect, and her influence was undeniable. She had changed the course of history not by demanding power, but by quietly taking it one calculated move at a time. And in doing so, she proved that even in the most patriarchal of societies, a woman's impact could resonate far beyond the boundaries of what was traditionally expected of her. Chapter 4. Struggles and Setbacks. Despite the steady rise in power and influence, her journey was not without significant obstacles. The road to success was fraught with betrayals, political rivalries, and societal pressures that tested her resolve at every turn. One of the first major challenges she faced was the jealousy of those who felt threatened by her growing influence. At court, where power and status were everything, many of the men and women who had once overlooked her now eyed her with suspicion and envy. Whispers followed her everywhere. Comments about her sudden rise, her closeness to her husband, and her ability to navigate the intricacies of court politics so effortlessly. She had learned long ago to ignore the whispers, but that didn't mean they didn't sting. Some of them will never accept a woman in a position of power. Her closest ally, a trusted courtier, once said, "They'll never understand how you've done it, how you've managed to gain the ear of the men who rule this place." She sighed deeply, her fingers tightening around the scroll she had been reading. "I don't need their acceptance," she replied, her voice steady, though her mind raced. "I only need to move ahead. The moment I stop, they'll see weakness." The rivalries at court were also becoming more pronounced. One particular Lord Kuroda, who had once been an ally, began to turn against her, sowing discord wherever he could. He was a man of ambition, seeking to elevate his own status by undermining those around him. He had started to question her role in political decisions, subtly casting doubt on her judgment in front of the council. "It's curious," he said to her husband one day, "how a woman can have so much influence over the matters of state when she should be concerned with more domestic affairs." The words were a veiled attack, one she knew was meant to discredit her. But she remained calm, ever composed, understanding that to retaliate openly would only make her vulnerable. "I'll take care of Kuroda," her husband promised after the incident, clearly angered. But she stopped him with a gentle hand. "No, let him speak." She said, her tone quiet but firm. "It's better to let the noise grow louder, for it will eventually reveal its true nature. We must outlast it, not confront it head on." It was her calmness in the face of attack that sometimes frustrated those around her. Her strategy was always to bide her time, to let her adversaries expose their own weaknesses. But this approach was not without its toll. The constant scheming, the undercurrent of rivalry, and the subtle betrayals slowly wore her down, and there were moments when she felt herself questioning the price of power. Then came the blow she least expected, a betrayal from within her own family. Her younger brother, once a loyal ally and confidant, began to speak out against her in public, siding with Kuroda and other disgruntled nobles. The sting of his betrayal cut deep, not just because of the political fallout it caused, but because of the personal hurt it inflicted. He had once looked up to her, admired her strength, but now he saw her as a threat to his own ambitions. "Why must you always be the one to lead?" he had asked her one night, his voice laced with frustration and resentment. "Why can't I have a chance to rise, to be seen as worthy of power without you overshadowing me?" Her heart ached as she listened to him, understanding that his feelings of inadequacy had driven him to betray the very woman who had supported him for so long. "You always had the potential, brother," she replied softly, though the bitterness of his words remained in her heart. But ambition without wisdom leads only to ruin. I never sought to overshadow you. I only sought to protect our family. His words, however, had already begun to spread through the court, and soon whispers of the rift between them became public. Her enemies seized upon this weakness, using her brother's betrayal as a tool to further undermine her credibility. The rivalry between them reached a breaking point, and for the first time, she found herself questioning everything: her strategy, her choices, and her trust in those she had once considered allies. As the tension escalated, she also faced the growing pressure of societal expectations. Despite her success, there were those who still saw her as little more than a woman playing in a man's world. A woman can never truly hold power. One of the senior lords had remarked to her husband, "She is only a figurehead, a puppet with no true influence." While those words were meant to wound, they only fueled her determination. But even her own people began to question whether a woman, no matter how capable, could truly navigate the complexities of political life. She had to constantly prove herself, walking a delicate line between maintaining her authority and not overstepping the boundaries set for women in feudal society. The weight of this dual struggle, both to maintain her position and to preserve her dignity as a woman in a patriarchal system, often felt overwhelming. "Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it," she confessed one night to her closest confidant, her voice soft as she gazed out at the moonlit courtyard. "I fight so hard, but the moment I show any weakness, they'll be there waiting to tear me down." Her friend, ever loyal, placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You are stronger than they will ever understand," she said softly, "and no matter what they say or do, your strength will carry you through." In the end, it was through these struggles that she truly came into her own. The betrayals, the rivalries, and the constant pressure from society only strengthened her resolve. She had learned that in a world where power was fleeting and fragile, only those who could endure the trials and setbacks would ever rise to lasting influence. Each obstacle, each challenge had become another lesson, another stepping stone on her journey to greatness. And while the road was often painful, it was also a road that led her to a deeper understanding of herself and the world around her. The betrayals and setbacks that had once seemed insurmountable became the very forces that shaped her growth. Instead of allowing herself to be consumed by frustration or bitterness, she took each challenge as an opportunity to recalibrate her strategy, refining her approach with an even sharper focus. The pain of betrayal, particularly from her brother, was deep, but she knew that emotional reactions, however justified, could only cloud her judgment. In the quiet hours of the night, when the weight of the world seemed unbearable, she would retreat to her chambers, reflect on her actions, and recalibrate. It was in those moments that her true strength emerged. One evening after yet another, heated argument with her brother, she sought solace with her closest confidant. Her eyes were tired, the flicker of doubt momentarily visible. How do you move forward when the very people you trust turn against you? She asked softly, her voice weary. Her confidant, who had always been a steady presence in her life, offered no immediate answers, but instead placed a hand on her shoulder. You move forward because you have no choice, she said gently. You fought for everything you have, and nothing will take it from you unless you allow it. People come and go, but your vision, your mission, is what will endure. Her friend's words, simple yet profound, reignited something within her. The realization that the setbacks, rather than being signs of failure, were simply temporary roadblocks to be navigated gave her the clarity she needed. She would not allow herself to be dragged down by petty betrayals. Instead, she would use them as fuel for her ambition. Her brother's betrayal, for example, had opened her eyes to the fragility of familial loyalty in such a turbulent world. She could no longer afford to trust blindly, and that lesson made her more cautious, more strategic in her dealings with both allies and rivals alike. As she recovered from the sting of betrayal, she turned her attention to reinforcing her position at court. Rather than publicly confronting her brother, she quietly secured alliances with those who were still loyal to her. You can fight openly, she often reminded her husband, but the real victories are won in silence in the shadows. By staying composed, she was able to maintain her influence even as her enemies grew more vocal. Her calm demeanor, in contrast to their bluster, made her appear not only more stable, but more formidable. It was also during this period of difficulty that she began to refine her political strategy. She recognized that true power did not lie solely in immediate victories, but in the long-term ability to adapt and maneuver. Her ability to play the long game, to wait for the opportune moment, rather than rushing into action, became a hallmark of her influence. One morning, after a failed attempt by one of her rivals to corner her at court, she sat down with her closest advisor. "They underestimate me," she said, her eyes sharp with determination. "They believe I'll react impulsively, but I'm not like them. I'll wait, and I'll make my move when it's most effective." Her advisor, who had long been a supporter of her methods, nodded in agreement. "You've already won, my lady. Their attacks will only weaken their own position while you remain unshaken." And so it happened. her rivals thinking they could discredit her through subtle attacks and whispers only managed to expose their own flaws. Their rash moves, their overconfidence ultimately turned the court against them. Meanwhile, she remained steady, unruffled, continuing to build her network of supporters. She made no public declarations, but behind the scenes, her influence deepened. She gained the loyalty of key officials, earned the trust of influential generals, and quietly began to shape the direction of policy. Her rise was not about grand gestures or public displays of power. It was about the quiet manipulation of circumstances, the patient building of relationships, and the unwavering commitment to her long-term goals. Even when society tried to push her back into the traditional mold of a passive woman, she outmaneuvered them. She used her perceived weakness as a woman to her advantage. Everyone underestimated her because they saw her only as a dutiful wife, a figurehead. In truth, she was shaping events without anyone fully understanding how. The final turning point came when her rival faction attempted to weaken her by spreading rumors about her involvement in a covert political maneuver. Rather than retreating, she stood firm, letting the rumors spread unchecked. She said nothing in her defense, allowing her enemies to overplay their hand. Soon the truth emerged, not through her words, but through their own actions. Those who had sought to discredit her became the focus of scrutiny, their own motives exposed for all to see. When they faltered, she was ready to step in, offering support to key figures who now saw her as a stabilizing force. "Let them think I'm weak," she said one night, reflecting on the months of calculated silence. "They'll come to realize that it is my silence that is my greatest strength." Her ability to remain unshaken, her patience in waiting for the perfect moment, had allowed her to outlast the chaos and position herself as a central figure of power. With each setback, each betrayal, her influence only grew. She had learned that real power was not about reacting immediately or fighting every battle. It was about resilience, strategy, and the quiet strength to weather any storm. Through her calmness, her patience, and her unwavering belief in her mission, she transformed every obstacle into an opportunity for growth. And in doing so, she built an empire of influence that would prove impossible to dismantle, no matter the betrayals or setbacks she faced. Her actions and decisions left an indelible mark on Japanese history, shaping not only the political landscape of her time, but also the cultural fabric of Japan for generations to come. Her rise to power, her ability to navigate a world dominated by men, and her strategic thinking transformed the way women were viewed in the context of leadership and influence. Though her legacy was often overshadowed by the more prominent male figures of the era, it is, in the quiet moments of reflection, the subtext of history, that her influence continues to resonate. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, her closest confidant remarked, "You've done more than just survive. You've changed the course of history." At first, she had been reluctant to believe it, dismissing her own actions as mere survival in a world that seemed bent on her failure. But over time, she began to understand the truth of her friend's words. It wasn't just about surviving the challenges of her time, it was about laying the foundation for future generations. By quietly asserting her influence, by showing that women could lead without demanding the spotlight, she had paved the way for others to follow. Her decisions in court politics and her ability to outmaneuver her rivals reshaped the structure of power in Japan. Where once the role of women was largely relegated to domestic duties or passive support, her example showed that a woman could wield power in subtle yet profoundly impactful ways. It wasn't through military conquest or political declarations, but through her strategic mind, her patience, and her ability to inspire loyalty in others that she became a force to be reckoned with. As the years passed, her legacy began to be etched into the annals of Japanese history. In the chronicles of the time, her name appeared in the margins of more prominent figures' stories, always there, always influencing, but rarely acknowledged in her own right. Yet her influence in shaping alliances, guiding political strategies, and securing the stability of her family was undeniable. Without her, the balance of power in Japan during that period would have been drastically different. In times of crisis, it was often her steady hand that guided the ship, ensuring that the course remained true. But it wasn't just in the history books where her legacy took root. As centuries passed, her influence became a source of inspiration in literature, art, and popular media. In the realm of literature, stories of her life began to emerge, told through the lens of an era that could not fully comprehend the depth of her contributions. She was often portrayed as a silent yet powerful force behind the scenes, an enigmatic figure who, despite the constraints of her time, shaped the destiny of nations. One such portrayal came in the form of a famous play that depicted the lives of women in feudal Japan. The character based on her was a central figure, though her name was never directly used. Instead, She was referred to as the hidden hand, a nod to the way she manipulated events from the shadows. The play portrayed her as a master strategist, a woman who used subtlety and intellect to bring about change in a world that expected her to be silent. Audiences flocked to see the portrayal, drawn to the idea of a woman who defied the expectations of her gender and shaped the future through her quiet strength. In the visual arts, her likeness began to appear in paintings that captured moments of political significance. In one famous piece, she is depicted sitting at a low table, her expression calm and composed as her male counterparts argue around her. Though she does not speak, her presence dominates the room, her gaze steady and calculating. The artist's portrayal reflected not just the physical likeness of the woman, but the power she held within the space. The image became a symbol of the untold strength that women had held throughout history, a strength often overlooked, but always present. In modern popular media, her legacy was revisited, especially in television dramas and films that explored the lives of historical figures. Though the historical accuracy of these portrayals was often debated, her character was depicted as a brilliant strategist and a formidable force in the political arena. She was shown not just as a supportive wife, but as a woman whose intellect and ambition could not be ignored. In one famous drama, her character was the subject of an entire season where the narrative focused on her journey from a seemingly submissive figure to a true leader in her own right. The portrayal resonated with viewers, particularly women, who saw in her the possibility of breaking through the limitations set by society. Her story, though fictionalized, became a source of empowerment and inspiration. Yet her legacy was not only about her actions, but also about the lessons she imparted through her life. She showed that power did not always have to be loud or ostentatious. It could be quiet, subtle, and rooted in intelligence and patience. She embodied the idea that women did not need to conform to traditional roles to be influential, that they could find their own path, even in a world that sought to silence them. Over time, her story became a symbol of resilience and determination. In the face of adversity, she remained steadfast. Despite the betrayals, the societal pressures, and the constant challenges to her authority, she found a way to not only survive, but thrive. She proved that the greatest power often lies not in what is seen, but in what is felt, the quiet, enduring influence of someone who knows how to move within a system without being consumed by it. As the years turned into centuries, her name became synonymous with wisdom, patience, and quiet power. Her legacy in Japanese culture continues to inspire, especially in the context of women's roles in leadership and politics. Her story is a reminder that history is not only shaped by those who wield swords or crowns, but by those who shape the world with their minds, their resilience, and their quiet strength. And though her name may have been lost in the shadows of time, her influence echoes throughout history, woven into the very fabric of Japan's cultural and political identity. Chapter 6: Relationships with Key Historical Figures. Throughout her rise to power, her relationships with key figures, rulers, generals, and influential women played a crucial role in shaping her path. At first, many saw her as just another noblewoman, a figurehead in a world dominated by powerful men. But over time, her ability to navigate these relationships, to foster alliances, and subtly influence key figures proved to be one of her greatest assets. Her relationship with her husband, the ruler, was central to her success. Though their marriage had started as a strategic alliance over the years, it evolved into something far more complex. He respected her intellect, even if he often struggled to fully acknowledge the extent of her influence. Their conversations were filled with mutual respect, though she knew that at times he saw her as a necessary advisor rather than an equal partner. One evening, as they sat together discussing a political crisis, he looked at her with a mixture of admiration and frustration. "You always seem to know the right path," he said, his voice tinged with both respect and exasperation. "But when will you trust me to make the final decision?" She met his gaze, her eyes calm but resolute. "You've never hesitated to listen to the advice of others," she replied softly. "Why not listen to me as well? The path you seek lies not just in your decisions, but in the decisions of those around you." His brow so furrowed, but he remained silent, clearly aware that she was right. In many ways, their partnership had become one of quiet collaboration. Though she often worked behind the scenes, her wisdom guided his actions. The balance between them was delicate. She was the unseen hand, and he the visible ruler. Yet in those moments when she offered her counsel, he knew that without her, the decisions would not have been as sound. Her relationship with generals and military leaders was equally strategic. While she was not directly involved in military campaigns, her influence over their strategies was undeniable. She had learned long ago the importance of understanding the minds of the generals, recognizing their fears, ambitions, and loyalties. She often used her connections with them to sway critical decisions, whether in the battlefield or in the council room. One such general, Lord Hayashi, was a fierce and honorable warrior known for his loyalty to the throne. Initially, he had been wary of her, seeing her as just another noblewoman with no true grasp of military matters. But after several meetings in which she demonstrated her understanding of strategy and her ability to predict the movements of their enemies, he began to see her in a new light. During a particularly tense standoff with a rival clan, Lord Hayashi approached her for advice. "You know the enemy better than I," he confessed one evening, his voice low with a rare vulnerability. "What should we do?" She looked at him, understanding the weight of his words. "It is not just their soldiers you must worry about," she replied, her voice steady and composed. "It is their alliances. They have long counted on their network of supporters to protect them. If you sever those alliances, they will crumble without a single sword raised." Her counsel proved invaluable, and the subsequent victory further solidified her reputation among the military leaders. While her influence remained subtle, it was clear that many generals now valued her strategic mind almost as much as their own battle plans. Her relationship with them, built on mutual respect, allowed her to manipulate the larger currents of power, steering decisions that ensured her family's survival and dominance. While her alliances with men were important, her relationships with other women of influence were equally pivotal. In a world where women were often sidelined or confined to the domestic sphere, she recognized the strength of those who managed to carve out their own spaces of power. One such woman was Lady Aiko, the head of a powerful noble family, who had been a close confidant throughout much of her life. Aiko was known for her intelligence and sharp wit, and though she was not as publicly influential as some of the male figures of their time, her network of support among the women at court was vast. In their private meetings, Lady Aiko would often speak candidly about the limitations women faced, the way their power was often reduced to the confines of the household. "They think we are weak," Aiko would say, her voice filled with a mixture of frustration and resolve. "But what they fail to see is that we are the ones who build the alliances that sustain them. We are the quiet force that ensures the stability of their world." Her words resonated deeply with her. She had seen firsthand how women, even in their traditional roles, held tremendous sway. Over time, she had formed a network of women who operated in the shadows, wives, daughters, and sisters of powerful men who had learned to use their influence to their advantage. Together, they shared information, helped each other navigate the treacherous waters of court politics, and supported one another in the pursuit of their goals. Their meetings, though often held in secret, became a critical part of her strategy. Through these relationships, she was able to gather intelligence, broker alliances, and secure her position, even in times of political unrest. Lady Aiko, in particular, had become one of her most trusted allies, offering both counsel and support when the political tides shifted against her. But it was not only alliances and political strategy that shaped her relationships. She understood the importance of understanding the emotions and motivations of those around her, whether they were rulers, generals, or women of influence. Her ability to listen, to understand the subtle dynamics at play, made her a unique figure in the court. She never sought power through force or intimidation, but through quiet manipulation, subtle persuasion, and an understanding of human nature. One of her former rivals, a high-ranking nobleman who had once sought to bring her down, came to her one evening, his expression wary. "I see now," he said quietly, his voice almost reluctant. "You've been so successful. You don't fight with swords or politics. You fight with understanding." She smiled faintly, not a smile of triumph, but one of quiet acknowledgement. "Understanding is the greatest weapon of all," she replied. "It is the key to navigating any relationship, any situation." Through her complex relationships with these figures, her husband, military leaders, fellow noblewomen, she had built an empire of influence. Each connection, each interaction reinforced her position and allowed her to wield power without ever appearing to grasp it. She had learned to move through the world not with force, but with subtlety, understanding, and the quiet strength of someone who knew that true power didn't always have to be visible to be effective. Her legacy, shaped by these relationships, would endure long after her time as a testament to the power of strategy influence and the strength of those who learn to navigate the complex web of human interaction. The relationships she built throughout her journey were not just about gaining allies or securing her position. They were the very foundation upon which her influence was built. Every relationship, whether with her husband, military leaders, or fellow women in power, provided her with unique insights and opportunities to shape the course of her life and her family's legacy. These connections allowed her to navigate the intricacies of court politics, and they were integral in her ability to make decisions that ensured her survival and growth in a world where women were largely invisible in the political realm. Her bond with her husband, while rooted in both personal affection and political necessity, played a pivotal role in her rise to power. At first, their relationship had been one of convenience, a strategic partnership designed to secure their family's position. But over time, as they faced countless challenges together, she became more than just his wife. She became his most trusted advisor. "You see what I cannot," he would often admit, his voice tinged with both frustration and admiration. "But I'm not sure I trust myself to listen sometimes." She had learned to navigate his temper and ego, understanding when to push him and when to hold back. Their conversations were always a delicate balance of influence and persuasion. "You see the world as it is," she told him one night as they discussed the growing unrest among their allies. "But I see the threads that connect it. You lead with your strength, but I can help you lead with your wisdom." Over time, his reliance on her insight grew. It wasn't always immediate, and at times she had to bite her tongue as he made decisions based on his own instincts. But little by little, she shaped his decisions, helping him to realize that his power wasn't just in his position, but in the strategic alliances he could form, and the way he listened to those around him, especially her. The trust and collaboration between them had a ripple effect throughout the court. As she quietly guided him, her influence over his actions extended to the political decisions he made. The allies she had cultivated among generals, lords, and lesser officials were often the ones who helped cement her influence behind the scenes. Her relationship with Lord Hayashi, a loyal general, was another critical element of her growing power. Though not a formal strategist, he respected her counsel because he saw her foresight and wisdom. "Your mind works in ways mine never will," he once remarked after a series of military maneuvers had gone unexpectedly well. "You have an understanding of the battlefield even when you're not there. Tell me, what do you see now?" She smiled, her gaze steady as she observed the unfolding situation. "The enemy will expect us to strike hard at the front," she explained, "but their weakness is not in their soldiers, it's in their supply lines. If we cut off their reinforcements, they'll fall apart long before we reach them." He had initially doubted her ability to understand military strategy, but over time, she proved herself invaluable. With Lord Hayashi's military expertise and her ability to foresee tactical opportunities, they formed a partnership that often swayed the tide of battles. Her relationship with him shaped her ability to influence military decisions, even though she never formally held command. The trust between them was built on mutual respect, and it was her calm, analytical approach to military strategy that often led to successes that would have otherwise been unattainable. The relationships she fostered with other women, especially Lady Aiko, were just as significant in shaping her decisions and influence. Aiko was more than just a confidant. She was a strategic partner in a world where women rarely held official power. We must not only understand our husbands and our brothers, Aiko said, once her voice quiet but resolute. We must understand the hearts of the women who influence them. We are the unseen hands, the ones who help steer the course without ever being acknowledged. Aiko's words became a guiding principle for her. By forming alliances with other women at court, particularly those in influential households, she strengthened her ability to gather information and shape decisions. Through these relationships, she was able to gather vital intelligence about court politics, family dynamics, and the shifting allegiances of those in power. She often met with these women in secret, exchanging knowledge and forging plans that would never be recognized, but were nonetheless powerful. The men may be the ones with swords, but we have the power of influence, she would tell them, knowing that their collective power, though invisible, was one of the greatest forces in the court. Through these relationships, she was able to anticipate threats, both personal and political, and act with precision. When Lord Kuroda, once a trusted ally, began to turn against her, it was Lady Aiko who first alerted her to the undercurrents of his discontent. He speaks of you behind closed doors, Aiko warned, and he sees you as a threat to his ambitions. You must be careful. If you don't act soon, he may undermine you. Rather than reacting with anger or retaliation, she used this information to her advantage. She bided her time, strengthening her alliances and making her position unassailable. When Kuroda made his move, attempting to discredit her in the eyes of the court, she had already secured enough support to neutralize his attack. The loyalty of the generals, the wisdom she had gained from her relationship with her husband, and the network of women who supported her all played a part in ensuring that Kuroda's plot was revealed for what it was, an attempt to seize power that was met with resistance from those who had come to trust her. In these moments, her relationships shaped her decisions in ways that were invisible to those around her, but had a profound impact on the political landscape. She didn't make decisions in isolation. every move she made was informed by the trust, loyalty, and information she had gathered from her allies. The people she surrounded herself with, whether they were men in positions of power or women working behind the scenes, were integral to the way she shaped the world around her. Her influence was not just about what she did, but about how she understood the people she worked with, how she fostered trust, and how she wielded power by connecting with others. Each relationship, whether built on strategic necessity, mutual respect, or shared goals, was a piece of the puzzle that allowed her to rise above the challenges of her time. These relationships, though often unseen by those around her, were the foundation of her influence, and they shaped every decision she made, ensuring that her impact on history was far greater than anyone could have anticipated. Chapter 7: Conflicts and Wars. Her involvement in conflicts and wars, though indirect, was crucial in shaping the course of her family's future, and by extension, the stability of the region. As a woman in a patriarchal society, she was not expected to engage in military matters directly, but she had learned early on that power, especially during times of war, was not just about having soldiers or commanding armies. It was about the ability to anticipate influence and manipulate the strategic landscape. Her role, though subtle, was often that of a behind-the-scenes strategist, guiding the decisions of those who wielded actual power on the battlefield. One of the most critical moments came during a major conflict between her clan and a rival faction, led by the powerful Lord Takeda, a formidable opponent who controlled vast territories and held immense influence. The war seemed inevitable. Lord Takeda had become increasingly aggressive, and tensions had risen to a breaking point. Her husband, the ruler, was preparing to lead the army himself, but she knew that the battle would not be won by sheer force alone. "We cannot afford to face him head-on in an open confrontation," she told her husband one evening, her voice calm yet firm. "His forces are too strong, and the terrain will work in his favor." Her husband, weary from the constant political pressures, sighed, looking at her with frustration. "What then? Are we to cower in fear and let him walk all over us?" "No," she replied, a quiet confidence in her tone. "We will fight on our terms. We will use his overconfidence against him." Her strategy was simple yet brilliant. Rather than directly attacking Lord Takeda's forces, she proposed a series of smaller, calculated skirmishes that would draw Takeda's forces deeper into unfamiliar terrain, away from their supply lines. The idea was to stretch their resources thin and force them into a position where they would have no choice but to overextend themselves. "What you're suggesting her husband asked, looking skeptical, is that we use the land itself as a weapon, that we lure them into a trap. Exactly, she answered. Takda believes his strength lies in numbers. He will not expect us to use the terrain to limit his movement. We will take away his ability to strike quickly. The plan was put into motion, and as her husband led the troops on the battlefield, she worked behind the scenes, orchestrating the smaller movements of the army. She made secret pacts with local warlords who controlled key mountain passes and rivers, ensuring that Takeda's supply lines would be intercepted. She even arranged for scouts to plant misinformation about her clan's movements, leading Takeda's forces into areas that were both difficult to navigate and strategically disadvantageous. For weeks, Takeda's forces were forced to move in circles, unaware that they were being baited into a series of smaller, debilitating confrontations. Finally, when they had overstretched themselves and their morale was at a breaking point, her clan launched a decisive, coordinated attack. Takeda's forces, exhausted and disorganized, were routed. It was not the victory of a massive army, but the triumph of strategy, patience, and understanding of both the terrain and the enemy's psychology. Her husband, who had initially doubted her plan, now saw her brilliance firsthand. "I don't know how you did it," he admitted, standing beside her after the battle. "But you've saved us from certain defeat. Without you, this would have been a very different story." "Sometimes," she replied, "it's not about fighting harder, it's about fighting smarter." Her role in the war solidified her status as not just a political figure, but as a strategist in her own right. The success of the campaign brought her even closer to the military leaders who now recognized her insights into warfare. One general, who had once regarded her as little more than a figurehead, approached her after the victory. "You have a mind for strategy," he said, his voice filled with reluctant respect. "If ever you need anything, know that you have my support." But while the battle against Lord Takeda was a significant victory, the war was not yet over. The peace that followed was tenuous at best, and the threat of other powerful factions seeking to take advantage of the power vacuum was ever present. She knew that the key to maintaining her clan's power was not just in defeating one enemy, but in securing alliances that would keep future conflicts at bay. The diplomatic maneuvering that followed the war was just as crucial as the battle itself. She worked tirelessly to negotiate peace treaties with neighboring clans, offering trade deals and promises of military aid in exchange for loyalty. But Her diplomatic skills were not limited to just formal negotiations. She understood the art of quiet persuasion, learning the desires and fears of key figures in other factions, offering them what they needed in exchange for their allegiance. One such negotiation was with Lord Mitsunari, a powerful but ambitious warlord who had initially been an enemy. "Your reputation precedes you," Lord Mitsunari said during their first meeting, his tone skeptical. "I've heard of your cunning on the battlefield, but what makes you think I would trust you after the war?" She smiled, leaning forward with an air of quiet confidence. "Because, Lord Mitsunari," she replied, "I understand the value of what you seek. Your strength is in your land, and I offer you the security to keep it. All I ask in return is your loyalty and a promise that you will not strike while my people are vulnerable." Her approach was simple, offering security in exchange for loyalty, and always leaving her opponents with something they needed, even if it wasn't immediately apparent. The peace treaty with Mitsunari was forged under terms that benefited both sides, ensuring that her family's position remained unchallenged in the aftermath of the war. While her influence in military strategy and diplomacy had already been proven, it was during this period of post-war recovery that she became the true architect of her family's enduring power. Her ability to turn enemies into allies, to use both the battlefield and the negotiation table to her advantage, shaped the future of the region for decades to come. Victory is more than a single battle. She once said to her closest advisors, "It's about ensuring that you remain untouchable long after the dust has settled." And it was through these deft moves in both war and diplomacy that she cemented her place as one of the most powerful, albeit invisible, figures of her time. Though she was not the one wielding a sword, her mind had fought and won many battles, ensuring that her legacy would be as lasting as any victory on the battlefield. ChatGPT said, "In the heat of war, when the chaos of battle often leaves even the most seasoned generals scrambling, she stood out not just for her insight, but for her unshakable composure. She never sought to be at the front lines with a sword in hand. Instead, she became the unseen force that guided the decisions, steadied the faltering, and provided a strategic vision when it seemed all was lost. Her leadership was rooted in her ability to see the broader picture, to understand the shifting tides of both war and diplomacy, and to maintain a calm resolve in moments of chaos. One evening, just before a significant battle against a rival faction, her husband, exhausted from days of planning and strategizing, came to her tent. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted, his voice weary, his face lined with the strain of constant pressure. "The men are scared, The generals are at odds, and Takeda's forces are too strong for us to face head on. I fear I may be leading them to their deaths." Without hesitation, she placed a hand on his arm, her touch steady and reassuring. "You're not leading them to death. You're leading them to victory. You just have to make them see it." Her words weren't just comforting. They were a call to action. Her husband had become so caught up in the fear of failure that he had lost sight of the potential for victory. "We've trained them. They believe in you, and they believe in this cause. You need to remind them why they're here. If we show them their purpose, they'll follow you to the end." With her encouragement, he gathered his commanders and the soldiers, preparing them for the fight ahead. But it was her words, not just his, that carried weight. She knew the power of conviction in a leader's voice, the ability to rally the troops even when the battle seemed unwinnable. She had no intention of commanding from the front, but she understood that a true leader inspired confidence, and that confidence would be the weapon they needed more than any sword. As the battle raged, she was not idly waiting. Behind the scenes, she worked tirelessly, sending messages to the generals and key allies, ensuring that the movements of the troops were coordinated and that supplies were secured. But she also understood that leadership in times of war wasn't just about strategy. It was about keeping spirits high when everything seemed to be crumbling. She visited the wounded in their tents, offering words of encouragement to the men who had lost their comrades. You fight not just for yourself, but for those who came before you, and for those who will come after. Your strength is their strength. She told them, her presence a reminder that their sacrifice was part of a greater cause. The most pivotal moment came when the tide of the battle seemed to turn against them. The enemy had made a sudden, unexpected move, pushing her husband's forces back. His generals were preparing to retreat, fearing that the battle was lost. It was in that moment that she knew her role was not to sit idly by, but to make sure the right decision was made. She stood before the generals, her voice cutting through the tension in the air. "This is not the time to retreat," she said, her tone unwavering. "If we pull back now, we will lose everything. We know this terrain better than they do. We've planned for this. We'll use the land to our advantage, force them into a position where their numbers will work against them." The generals looked uncertain, but her resolve steadied them. She understood that fear could paralyze even the bravest, and it was her job to show them that their only option was to press forward. There's no retreat. If you want to survive, you fight with everything you have, she added, her eyes fixed on the men who were ready to flee. Her plan was risky, but it was brilliant. She ordered her forces to split into smaller, faster units that would move through the less explored routes in the surrounding terrain, flanking the enemy and cutting off their retreat. As the sun began to set and the battle dragged on her forces, now re-energized by her determination, struck at the enemy from unexpected angles. The rival factions' overconfidence worked against them. By the time Takeda's forces realized what was happening, they were surrounded and had no choice but to surrender. The battle was won not through overwhelming strength, but through strategy, unity, and the belief that retreat was never an option. When the dust settled, her husband came to her, his face flushed with a mix of exhaustion and awe. "You saved us," he said simply, though the gratitude in his eyes spoke volumes. "I could never have done this without you." She gave a small smile, her eyes reflecting the weight of the victory they had just secured. "We did this together, but it was your belief in the men that won this. I only gave them the strength to believe in themselves." Her leadership was never about being the loudest voice in the room, but about knowing when to speak, when to act, and when to trust those around her. In times of war, she led not just by commanding others, but by lifting them up, reminding them of their strength, and keeping the larger vision in mind. While others focused on tactics and weapons, she understood that the true weapon was morale, the belief that victory was possible no matter the odds. Her influence extended far beyond the battlefield. Her ability to anticipate the needs of her people, to understand the hearts and minds of those around her, made her indispensable. She didn't fight with a sword, but her influence in the war rooms, her quiet counsel to the generals, and her ability to keep the troops united in their purpose made her an irreplaceable figure in the conflict. And in the aftermath, when the wounds had healed and the land began to recover, it was her legacy, not just as a wife or advisor, but as a true leader, that would be remembered. In the midst of the chaos of court politics, military conflicts, and the weight of leadership, she found grounding in the rituals and practices that connected her to something greater than herself. She had been raised with an understanding of the spiritual roles women often played in feudal Japan, especially those who were in positions of influence. Though she was not a priestess in the traditional sense, her life was imbued with spiritual practices, that shaped her decisions and in turn helped guide her actions. One of the most significant aspects of her spiritual life was her relationship with the rituals of Shinto, the indigenous spirituality of Japan. The kami, the spirits believed to inhabit everything from trees and rocks to rivers and mountains, were central to her worldview. Early each morning, long before the hustle of court life began, she would rise and make her way to a small shrine on her family's estate, hidden away in a secluded grove. It was there, in the quiet solitude, that she would offer prayers of gratitude and seek guidance from the kami. Her ritual was simple but profound. With each prayer, she offered a small cup of sake and a sprig of sakura, placing them at the shrine as a symbol of purity and respect. In the stillness of the morning, with the sounds of the forest surrounding her, she felt a deep sense of connection to the land, to the history of her ancestors, and to the delicate balance of life that sustained her. It was in these moments that she found peace, allowing her mind to clear and her heart to steady. Her closest confidant once asked her, "What do you find in these quiet moments? When the world around you is so chaotic, how do you find peace?" She smiled, her voice soft with the weight of experience. "I find that in stillness, I hear the world more clearly. The wind through the trees, the ripple of water over stones. These are the true rhythms of life. In them, I remember that we are all just part of something much larger." Though she did not discuss these moments of prayer or reflection openly, they were vital in shaping her character. They provided her with a sense of humility, reminding her that her actions, whether in war or politics, were part of a larger cosmic order. These spiritual practices kept her grounded and connected to the values of honor and respect that were so important in her culture. They also gave her the strength to make difficult decisions. During a particularly intense period of conflict, when her enemies seemed to be closing in from all sides, she took solace in the spiritual rituals that had shaped her. One night, after a long day of strategizing and negotiations, she walked to the shrine, the weight of the world pressing on her shoulders. As she knelt before the kami, she whispered a prayer, asking for guidance and for strength to do what was right for her people. Her servant, who had watched her from a distance, remarked the next day, "I've never seen you like this before. You have the strength of a lion, yet in these moments you seem so gentle." She nodded, her expression serene. "Strength is not always in power," she said softly. True strength comes from knowing when to stand firm and when to yield. I seek that balance between action and patience, between power and humility. Her spiritual practices also manifested in her role as a protector of her people. She understood that her influence extended beyond the court and the battlefield. It reached into the everyday lives of the people who depended on her leadership. She had the ritual of offering protection to the lands under her care, performing ceremonies to ensure peace and prosperity for the villages that surrounded her estate. She would often visit the farmers, the artisans, and the common folk, offering blessings for their harvests and their safety. Her presence, especially during difficult times, gave them hope and a sense of connection to the divine forces they believed watched over them. Do you truly believe that these rituals bring them peace? One of her advisors once asked, "In this world of warriors and politics, do you think the kami care about the common folk?" She had paused before answering, considering the question carefully. "I believe that the kami are in all things," she said, her voice firm. "The land, the people, the trees, everything. By honoring the spirits, we honor life itself. And in doing so, we are given the clarity to make the right decisions for those we lead. It is not about faith alone. It is about respect for the natural world and the balance it teaches us." Her belief in the importance of rituals and spiritual practices also extended to her role in ensuring the continuity of tradition. During moments of peace, when court life was less fraught with tension, she would host ceremonies that brought together the most influential figures of her time. These ceremonies were not only political in nature, they were deeply spiritual, a reminder of the bonds that connected the ruling class to the land and to the spirits that guided their actions. At one such gathering, she stood before a gathering of nobles, each seated in the ornate hall. The air was thick with tension as rival factions subtly exchanged veiled threats. But as she began the ceremony, she led them in a chant calling upon the kami to bless their meeting and guide their decisions. The act of invoking the divine seemed to shift the energy in the room, and for a brief moment, even the most contentious figures were united in the shared ritual. After the ceremony, a noblewoman who had been particularly hostile toward her in previous meetings came to her. Her expression softened. "I did not expect such peace from a simple ritual," she confessed. "There is something about these moments that makes even the hardest decisions seem easier." Her ability to use spirituality as a tool of diplomacy as well as personal reflection became an important part of her leadership. She understood that the minds of men could be swayed by logic, strategy, and force, but the hearts of those around her were touched by something deeper. The belief that the divine watched over them, guiding their choices and ensuring the balance of the world. In her later years, as she reflected on her life and the wars she had fought, she came to see her spiritual practices not as separate from her political and military roles, but as inseparable. They shaped her decisions in ways that were subtle but profound. Her ability to maintain balance, to remain patient in times of conflict, and to act with humility and honor, all of these qualities were influenced by the rituals and spiritual beliefs that had shaped her from an early age. Sometimes I wonder if all of this power, this influence was ever truly mine. She said to her closest advisor one evening, or if I was simply a vessel for the will of the kami. Her advisor, ever loyal, smiled. You may not have sought the power, but you've carried it with grace and wisdom. Perhaps it was meant for you all along. She nodded thoughtfully, watching the sunset from her private chambers. Perhaps she murmured, but it was the rituals, the stillness, and the connection to something greater that kept me grounded. Without that, none of this would have been possible. In the end, her spiritual practices became not just a personal ritual, but the invisible thread that tied her leadership to the land, to her people, and to the forces beyond her control. They shaped her character, provided her with strength, and ensured that even in the darkest times, she never lost sight of the greater purpose that guided her decisions. Throughout her rise to power, her journey was filled with both external victories and internal battles that tested her character and resolve. Beneath the strength and decisiveness that defined her leadership, there was an undercurrent of personal doubt, moral dilemmas, and the heavy burden of sacrifice that weighed on her soul. She had long learned the art of concealing her vulnerabilities, presenting a composed, unwavering front to those around her. Yet in the quiet moments alone, the doubts and fears would come rushing forward, threatening to undo the carefully constructed image of a powerful leader. One evening, after a particularly taxing meeting with her generals, she walked alone through the palace gardens, her mind heavy with the decisions she had made. Her path had been marked by political victories and military success, but each victory seemed to bring a new challenge, a new sacrifice. As she stopped beside a quiet pond, she gazed at her reflection in the water, her eyes troubled. Why does it feel like I've lost so much? Along the way, she whispered to herself, the weight of her decisions pressing down on her chest. She had made so many choices, some necessary, others more difficult, that had led her to this point. But there were consequences. Her relationships had been strained, and she had sacrificed her own peace of mind in the pursuit of power. How much more am I willing to give? Her closest confidant, who had quietly followed her into the garden, approached her with a knowing look. You've given so much already, but it's clear that it has not been without cost. She nodded, her voice tinged with weariness. Sometimes I wonder if the sacrifices were worth it. The men who I've trusted, the friendships I've built, so many of them have been tested, and I've lost more than I care to admit. Her confidant placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You've made decisions for the greater good. In times of war, in times of great pressure, we all have to make sacrifices. But it doesn't mean you've lost yourself. It means you've put others first, even when it's been painful. Her words offered some comfort, but the internal struggle remained. The sacrifices she had made had not only cost her personal connections, but had also forced her to confront the darker side of leadership. There had been times when she had chosen to deceive, manipulate, or even betray those who had once been allies, all in the name of securing her family's future. Each decision had been made with the belief that the end justified the means, yet there were moments when the weight of those choices haunted her. One such moment came when she had been forced to turn her back on a former ally, a close confidant who had once helped her rise to power. The man had become a liability. His ambitions had begun to threaten her carefully laid plans, and despite their shared history, she had been forced to remove him from the equation. The betrayal stung, and as she sat alone in her chambers later that night, she asked herself if she had done the right thing. Was it truly necessary to sacrifice him, or did I choose the easier path? The question lingered in her mind, gnawing at her, but she knew there was no turning back. In the game of power, there was no room for hesitation. The world she navigated was one where loyalty could be fleeting, and the moral lines between right and wrong were often blurred. She had learned to live with the uncomfortable truth that in order to maintain control, she sometimes had to make choices that violated her own sense of morality. Her internal battles weren't just about power or politics. They were about the kind of person she wanted to be. I wonder, she confided in her closest advisor one evening, if I've become someone I don't recognize. I tell myself it's for the greater good, but in the quiet of the night, I wonder if I've lost sight of who I truly am. Her advisor, who had been with her since her earliest days in the court, looked at her with a mixture of sympathy and understanding. "You are still the same person you've always been," he said gently. "The path you walk is difficult, and the choices you've had to make have not been easy. But your heart, your intentions, they have always been for the good of those around you. Never forget that." Despite his reassurances, she could not silence the doubts that plagued her. Every moral dilemma, every difficult decision brought her face to face with the question of whether she was truly living according to her values or simply just surviving. The emotional toll of her journey weighed heavily on her, and sometimes she wondered how much more she could endure before the burden became too much to bear. There was also the toll it had taken on her relationships. As her power grew, she had found herself distanced from those she once cared for most. Her husband, though loyal and supportive, had become a shadow of the man she had once known. His dependence on her advice, though necessary, had placed an emotional distance between them. "When did we become this?" she asked him one night, her voice soft with a touch of sadness. "When did I become your advisor and not your partner?" He looked at her with a sorrowful expression. "You've always been my partner," he said quietly. "But the burden of leadership, the weight of the decisions we've had to make, it has changed us both." Her internal struggle was not just about external conflict, but about reconciling the woman she had once been with the leader she had become. At times, she felt like a stranger to herself, caught between her desires for peace, love, and connection, and the harsh realities of the world she inhabited. She had sacrificed so much: her peace, her relationships, her sense of self, to protect her people and secure her family's place in history. Yet as she stared into the mirror at the woman who had emerged from those sacrifices, she wondered if the cost had been too great. In the quiet moments of reflection, she realized that her triumphs were not without their scars. The victory she had sought had come at a price, and though she had secured her place in history, she had also lost pieces of herself along the way. Yet she knew that no matter the personal cost, she had done what was necessary. She had fought not just for power, but for the future, a future that would outlast the weight of her personal struggles. And in that, she found a sense of peace, however fleeting, knowing that her sacrifices had been part of a larger purpose. Despite the heavy burdens she carried, her journey was marked by a series of triumphs that were both personal and profound. Each victory, whether in the political arena or in her internal struggles, was a testament to her resilience and determination to carve a path in a world that was not built for women to succeed. Her victories were never easy, but they were earned through sheer will intelligence and an unwavering belief in her vision. One of her most significant triumphs came after a period of doubt when she felt the weight of her decisions bearing down on her. She had faced numerous betrayals, both from allies and family, and the emotional toll had almost broken her. Her relationship with her husband had become strained, and she had begun to question whether her ambition had come at the cost of their connection. "Is this the woman I've become?" she asked herself one quiet evening. "Is this truly worth it?" Her closest confidant had noticed her growing distance and confronted her, urging her to reconsider her path. "You've sacrificed so much for this," he said, his voice filled with concern. "But do not forget what you stand for. You've already done so much good. Your people, your family, everything you've fought for depends on you seeing this through." His words struck a chord with her. She realized that the purpose she had set out to achieve was far greater than her personal struggles. She had worked tirelessly to secure her family's place in history, to lead with wisdom and strength. But her internal battle had clouded her sense of purpose. She needed to rediscover what had driven her in the first place, not just to survive, but to thrive, to lead with integrity and vision. That moment of clarity reignited something within her. "I've come too far to falter now," she whispered to herself as she walked alone through the palace gardens. She knew she had the strength to rise above the personal doubts that had held her back. She had survived betrayal, grief, and immense pressure. She had proven time and again that she could overcome any obstacle. The journey ahead would not be easy, but she had faced far greater challenges before. The next day, she summoned her most trusted advisors, her generals, and even some of her old rivals who had once doubted her. She addressed them with a renewed sense of purpose. "We have faced setbacks, and many of you thought I would falter, but now I am more certain than ever. This is our time. We will rebuild, we will push forward, and we will achieve everything we've set out to do." Her words were not just a rallying cry. They were a declaration of her own strength. Her confidence once again was palpable. Her leadership, forged in the fires of internal struggle, had become even more formidable. She led her people forward, restoring the alliances that had been frayed and reconciling with those she had once alienated. Through sheer determination and humility, she regained the trust of those around her. In the face of political opposition, she began to turn the tides in her favor. Her rivals, once certain they could undermine her, found themselves outmaneuvered. Every move she made, whether in court or in diplomacy, was calculated, poised to achieve her goal without unnecessary conflict. It was clear that she had learned to balance the sharpness of her mind with the wisdom of her heart. "I no longer fight for power alone," she said one evening as she shared a quiet moment with her husband. "I fight for our future, for the legacy we'll leave behind." Her triumph wasn't just in the external victories she achieved, but in how she had learned to reconcile her ambitions with her personal values. She no longer saw power as a force to be used recklessly, but as a responsibility to be wielded wisely. She had learned to take the setbacks and turn them into lessons to grow stronger from the moments of weakness. Her ability to maintain her integrity despite the many challenges became her greatest triumph. One of the most personal triumphs came when she finally reconciled with her brother who had once betrayed her. The rift between them had been painful, and for years the wound of his disloyalty lingered. But in a quiet, private moment, she reached out to him. "We've both made mistakes," she said softly, her voice filled with a vulnerability that few had seen. "But we are family, and family must stand together." Her brother, who had struggled with his own doubts and insecurities, looked at her, the walls between them slowly crumbling. "I was wrong," he admitted, his voice thick with regret. "I was blinded by my own ambitions, and in doing so, I lost sight of what truly mattered. I have always admired you, and I realize now that you never sought power for its own sake." Their reconciliation wasn't immediate or without pain, but it marked a turning point in her personal journey. She had learned the importance of forgiveness, not just for others, but for herself. In that moment, she realized that her greatest triumph was not in the victories she had won, but in the ability to grow beyond the struggles, to learn from them, and to emerge stronger and more connected to those she loved. As she looked back on her life, she saw the countless obstacles she had overcome, the personal sacrifices she had made, and the immense growth she had experienced. She was no longer just a figurehead or a woman struggling to survive in a man's world. She had become a leader in her own right, not just through power and intellect, but through the strength of her character. She had faced the darkness within herself and emerged victorious, not because she was without flaws, but because she had the courage to confront them and rise above. Her triumphs were not the result of a single battle or a singular moment of glory. They were the culmination of every challenge, every personal doubt, and every moral dilemma she had faced. And in overcoming them, she had become something far more powerful than a ruler. She had become a woman who had mastered herself, and in doing so, had shaped the destiny of those around her. In the final years of her life, as the weight of her many triumphs and sacrifices began to take its toll, she knew that her time on earth was drawing to a close. The intensity of the wars, the endless political maneuvering, and the responsibility of securing her family's legacy had all left their marks on her body and mind. But it wasn't just the physical toll that made her reflect on her life. It was the quiet realization that the world she had fought to build was now in a delicate balance, one she could no longer control. Despite the graying of her hair and the deepening lines of age, she had not lost the sharpness of her mind. Her once steady hand, which had guided the kingdom through many turbulent times, had become a source of counsel for the younger generation. Her son, now a young man, and the heir to her domain, had begun to take on more responsibilities, and while she trusted him, there was a lingering worry that the legacy she had built might not be fully appreciated in the years to come. One quiet evening, as she sat beside her son in the garden of their estate, she spoke to him of the future. "You are ready," she told him softly, her gaze fixed on the setting sun. "The time will come when you must lead without my guidance, but always remember, lead with wisdom, not just strength." He looked at her, the weight of her words settling into his heart. "I will do my best, Mother," he said, his voice filled with the respect he had always held for her. But there was a trace of fear in his eyes. "But how do I live up to all that you've done? You've accomplished so much. I don't know if I'm capable of following in your footsteps." She smiled faintly, her expression softening. "It's not about following my footsteps," she said, her voice full of quiet conviction. "It's about creating your own path. You will face challenges, but you have the strength to overcome them. Just never lose sight of what is truly important: your people, your honor, and the future you want to build. I have faith in you." Her son's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment he saw not just the powerful leader his mother had been, but the woman who had carried the weight of so many decisions, who had made countless sacrifices to secure their future. "I won't let you down," he promised, though the fear of what lay ahead still gripped him. As the years passed, her health began to decline. The constant pressure, the physical toll of leading a nation, and the emotional weight of her many decisions took their toll on her body. She could no longer take long walks in the gardens or oversee the daily affairs of the court as she once had. But even in her weakened state, she continued to provide counsel, offering advice to her son and the advisors who sought her wisdom. Her closest confidant, now aged as well, visited her daily, bringing news from the court. "Your son is doing well," he said, his voice full of warmth. "He listens to you, and the people trust him. Your legacy will endure." She nodded, though there was a sadness in her eyes. "I have done what I can," she said softly, "but I fear that the world may be changing in ways I will not live to see. The old ways are being forgotten, and I wonder if my son will be able to navigate the shifting tides." Her confidant smiled gently, placing a hand on hers. "You have prepared him as best as anyone could. He has the strength of your wisdom." But there was still a sense of uncertainty in her heart. She had spent her life building and protecting, and now in her final days, she questioned whether the foundations she had worked so hard to secure would hold up in the future. The fear of the unknown, of leaving a world that was still so fragile, lingered in her mind. As her final days approached, she gathered those closest to her, her son, her advisors, and a few trusted generals at her bedside. Her once steady voice now trembled, but her words carried the weight of a lifetime of experience. "I have seen many things in my time." She began, her voice low but clear. "I have fought battles, lost friends, and made choices that have haunted me. But through it all, I have learned one thing, that nothing is more important than the well-being of the people. Protect them, guide them, and never forget that true leadership comes from serving others." Her son, now standing at the threshold of leadership, nodded solemnly. "I will, mother, I promise." As she lay there, surrounded by the people she had once guided, she closed her eyes for the last time. Her death was not dramatic, but quiet, a final exhale after a lifetime of exhausting work. The kingdom mourned, not just for the ruler they had lost, but for the woman who had led them through some of their darkest times. Her legacy was sealed not only in the political realm, but in the hearts of the people she had shaped and protected. In the months and years that followed her death, her memory lived on in countless ways. Her son took up the mantle of leadership, and though he struggled at times, he often sought the guidance of the wisdom his mother had imparted to him in their quiet moments together. The kingdom flourished in part because of the foundation she had built, and her leadership continued to influence the course of history long after she had passed. Her story, like many of the great leaders of history, was not simply one of power or triumph, but of sacrifice, of moments of doubt, and of the courage to face both personal and external battles. She was remembered as a woman who had defied the expectations of her time, who had shaped the future with her intellect, her compassion, and her unwavering strength. In art, in literature, and in the oral histories passed down through generations, her legacy became a symbol of leadership resilience and the quiet strength that often goes unnoticed but is no less powerful. She was not just a ruler. She was a mother, a mentor, and a protector. And though the world continued to change after her death, her influence remained woven into the very fabric of the kingdom. She had helped to build a kingdom that would forever remember the woman who had led them through the storm and left behind a legacy that would endure for centuries. As the years passed since her death, the world around her shifted. New generations rose, new leaders took their place, and the challenges of the age changed. But in the quiet corners of history, her name was never forgotten. The people who had lived through her reign, those who had been touched by her leadership, spoke of her with reverence and gratitude. Her son, now the ruler, often found himself in moments of doubt, faced with decisions that tested his resolve. On one particularly trying day, after a series of setbacks had left him feeling overwhelmed, he sought solace in the study that had once been hers. The room was filled with the faint scent of incense, and the soft glow of candlelight flickered against the walls. It was here that she had spent countless hours strategizing, advising, and guiding him. It was here that she had shared her wisdom, and in this room he could still feel her presence. He sat at her desk, running his fingers over the smooth wood, and whispered to himself, "What would you have done, Mother?" The silence of the room seemed to answer back, and for a brief moment it felt as though she was still there with him, her calm demeanor offering him strength. In that moment of quiet reflection, he realized that her influence had never truly left him. Her teachings, her way of seeing the world, were still guiding him even in her absence. She had taught him not just how to lead, but how to understand the world around him, how to read the room, how to anticipate not just the moves of his enemies, but the needs of the people. He stood looking out the window at the land she had once ruled. "I will honor you," he whispered, his voice filled with determination. "Your legacy will live on, not just in the kingdom, but in the way we choose to lead through wisdom, compassion, and strength. Her journey had been long and filled with trials, but she had faced every challenge with a quiet, unyielding resolve. Her impact on history wasn't just in the victories she had won or the battles she had led. It was in the way she had shifted the very nature of leadership. She had demonstrated that power was not just about wielding a sword, but about understanding the people, anticipating their needs, and making decisions that were guided by a sense of purpose and a deep moral clarity. Though her story was often overshadowed by the more dramatic tales of war and conquest, her influence was undeniable. She had defied the constraints of her time, carving out a place for herself in a world that had not been built for women to thrive. And in doing so, she became not just a ruler, but a symbol of quiet strength, resilience, and the enduring power of wisdom. In literature, her story was told and retold, each version capturing a different aspect of her legacy. Some spoke of her strategic brilliance, others of her compassion, and still others of the personal sacrifices she had made to ensure the future of her people. Artists painted her as both a leader and a woman of deep introspection, a figure who understood that true power was not in dominance, but in the ability to uplift and guide others. Her story became a cornerstone of cultural understanding, taught to young women as an example of what could be achieved through perseverance, intelligence, and the courage to stand against the tides of history. Her name became synonymous with the idea that a leader's greatest strength lay not in their title or their military might, but in their ability to see the humanity in others, to inspire, and to act with integrity. In the decades following her death, as new challenges arose and new leaders took their places, her impact was still felt. In times of crisis, her name was invoked, not just as a reminder of a powerful ruler, but as a call to act with wisdom, to lead with purpose. Her legacy was not just in the structures she built or the policies she enacted, but in the way she had shaped the very idea of what it meant to lead, to be both a ruler and a servant to those she governed. As the kingdom flourished under her son's reign, there were moments when it seemed as though she was still guiding them. Her presence in the decisions that were made, the alliances that were formed, and the ways in which her son chose to govern. He often turned to the lessons she had taught him, trusting her guidance even though she was no longer physically present. This is how you would have seen it he would say to himself. And in those moments, he felt her wisdom echoing through his own actions. Her enduring impact wasn't just in her lifetime, but in the generations that followed. The values she instilled in those who served her, the lessons she imparted to those who followed her path, shaped the course of history. She had shown that leadership wasn't about dominating others. It was about understanding, about serving, and about knowing when to act and when to listen. As the years turned into centuries, her name became more than just a historical footnote. It became a symbol of the quiet power that women could wield in a world that often sought to silence them. She became a figure of inspiration, her story passed down through generations, not just as the tale of a ruler, but as the story of a woman who, against all odds, had changed the course of history. Her legacy was immortal, not in the form of monuments or statues, but in the hearts and minds of those who had been touched by her example. And even as time moved forward, her influence endured, echoing through the decisions of future leaders, inspiring them to lead not with fear, but with wisdom and heart. As we reflect on the life of this remarkable woman, we see that her journey was defined by both immense challenges and incredible triumphs. She was born into a world where women were expected to remain in the shadows, confined by societal norms that dictated their roles. Yet through her resilience, intelligence, and strategic mind, she rose to become not just a figurehead, but a leader who shaped the course of history. From her quiet rise to power, where she masterfully navigated a male-dominated society, to her ability to inspire and lead through both wisdom and compassion, her life stands as a testament to the strength and potential of women in positions of power. Her struggles were many betrayals, personal sacrifices, and the constant tension between her ambition and her desire for peace. She faced moral dilemmas that forced her to question her actions and the cost of her decisions, yet each challenge strengthened her resolve and deepened her understanding of leadership. She learned to balance intellect with compassion, strength with humility, and power with responsibility. Her triumphs were equally profound. She became a master strategist both on the battlefield and in the halls of diplomacy. She forged alliances, outmaneuvered rivals, and perhaps most importantly, she inspired those around her to believe in themselves and in the vision she had for the future. Her leadership wasn't just about securing victories, it was about shaping a lasting legacy of wisdom, intrigue, and service to the people. In the end, Her legacy continues to influence how we view leadership and power today. Her story challenges modern perceptions of women in power, showing that leadership doesn't require domination or force. It requires empathy, understanding, and the ability to unite others in a common cause. She demonstrated that women, even in the most patriarchal of societies, have the strength to shape history and to redefine the roles they are assigned. Her life proves that leadership is not about gender. It's about character vision and the courage to make decisions that benefit the greater good. Now, as we reflect on her legacy, it's clear that her life has shaped the way we understand leadership today. Women in positions of power, whether in politics, business, or society, still face many of the challenges she encountered, being underestimated, having their authority questioned, and having to prove their worthiness in spaces that have traditionally been dominated by men. But her story provides a powerful example of what can be achieved when women are given the opportunity to lead, to make decisions, and to carve their own path. I'd like to pose a question for you to reflect on. How do you think her life has shaped modern-day views on gender and power? Her story has the potential to challenge the way we think about leadership today, especially when it comes to the role of women. Does it inspire you to think differently about the women in power around you? How does it influence your perspective on the challenges women still face in leadership roles? I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a conversation about how stories like hers can continue to shape the future. If you enjoyed this exploration of history and leadership, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more historical stories like this one. Stay connected, and we'll continue bringing you powerful stories from the past that still resonate today.